Hi, I'm Sarah Daymond. I got a major in screenwriting, so none of you have to. I didn't want to particularly study screenwriting. I wanted to study narrative design. I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a narrative designer, even though there wasn't really a word for it back in the early 2000s. So I couldn't really study that. There were no options even for game design really when I was younger, and I'm not that old. It's amazing to see that there are options these days, but back then it was I could study game programming, which wasn't at all my sort of area of interest, or I could study something tangential to narrative design. At the time my options were either writing for books or writing for screen, and I thought it would be easier to focus on screen that would be sort of pivotable into game narrative. And I don't know if I was right or not, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Put your hand up if you know what the 3-act structure is. I assume you all do because you read the title of this talk. So if you've heard of it but you don't know much about it, it's this thing up here. It's 3 acts, but specifically in a line of dots with specific actions that happen. So the first act is where the audience learns who the main characters are, what's important to them, what's driving them, what their normal world is, something about what their lives are like, and what might be at stake if everything goes to hell and the man comes in and buys the record store that they all work at, or something along those lines. On this diagram, when something happens, that's called plot point 1. Sometimes it's called the first turning point, a dramatic incident, etc., etc., etc. A lot of people who write books on 3-act structure like to give things their own names, because even though they're all using the same structure, they've gotten you to buy their book, so they have to contribute some new terminology to the mix. And the fact that this new thing has happened ends the first act because their lives have changed or something around those circumstances. So normalcy's been turned on its head. We get thrown into the second act, which is also where some sort of dramatic question arises. Will they find their missing friend? Will she get the guy before he marries her aunt? I don't know what state I was in when I wrote my speaker notes, but that's what inspired me at the time. In the second act, things escalate, keep getting worse. The good guys need to learn to somehow better themselves to beat the rising odds. They need that magical character development juice. Things get a little better, then get dramatically worse, and then we swing into plot point 2, also known as another turning point or another dramatic incident, and everything they thought they knew was suddenly upended again, but it feels worse this time. It's sometimes called the dark night of the soul, and this takes us into the third act where the stakes are at their highest. Everything, fortunately, is going to get wrapped up in the third act because there's not as much time as you had in the rest of the story. The climax is the moment where all the rising stakes finally collide. There's some major do-or-die moment where the protagonist has to use everything they've learned to save the day, to get the guy, or avenge their fallen comrades. And then there's this space here after the climax where everyone goes, all's well that ends well, as though they hadn't been screaming their heads off since the first turning point. Depending on your project, this could be a really helpful structure, but it's not the structure, it's not the foundation of storytelling. Or is it? It was invented by a guy called Sid Field in the 70s. This was the first major book on screenwriting. Before this came out, most people used Lagos Egri's The Art of Dramatic Writing, a book written about writing for the stage. So I had to take screenshots of this because it wouldn't let me copy-paste the text. But this guy's great. So I'll give you a moment to pore over that. I did not put this in my speaker notes, so I'm going to have to make myself stand up. So everyone who's written about writing has something really unique and interesting to tell you, because every writer has something unique and interesting to say. I particularly like this guy, but he had no idea what was coming in the industry. He had no idea that video games were coming. So Sid Field, however, said a lot of things. This is the 2005 revised version. I couldn't find the original version from the 70s, but due to the popularity of the three-act structure, I found that a lot of what Sid Field had to say about the three-act structure made it sound like he had discovered something that had already existed. I mean, you can't argue with Aristotle, right? Aristotle invented writing. He didn't. I'm being facetious here. Aristotle didn't invent writing. Very Western idea that Aristotle is responsible for everything we know about storytelling. So, in a broad sense, everything we know in the Western world about narrative structures did start with Aristotle. If I'm pronouncing his name wrong, I'm so sorry. As I said, I studied screenwriting, which is applicable to writing and not much else. It's a good thing I'm a narrative designer. So things probably started before him, since there were thousands of years of recorded history before he was born, but for the sake of this very short block, we're starting with him. He wrote a work of literary theory called The Poetics. We're not diving too deep into any of this. I'm laying down groundwork so we're all on the same page. We've got a lot of people with a lot of opinions to get through. Aristotle said, I'll give you a moment to read that. I'm not going to read everything out loud. Actually, you know what? Yes, I will. So, let us now consider the proper construction of the fable or plot, as that is at once the first and most important thing in tragedy. He was speaking about tragedies, not all forms of writing, tragedies. Now, a whole is that which has beginning, middle, and end. A beginning is, he's being very wordy here, like a beginning is the thing at the start. The middle is the thing that has something before it and something after it. The end has things before it but nothing after it. So a well-constructed plot can't begin and end at any point you want. The beginning and end have to be at the beginning and the end. It's not quite the same as what Sid Field said. So there's John Truby, I'm about to quote, another screenwriter who has a lot to say about storytelling. He is particularly damning when it comes to the three-act structure. So I've trimmed this down a bit because he spent a lot more words ripping into how much he hates three-act structure. Another thing you will find if you read a lot of books on writing, people can be really, really disagreeable if they think that what someone else has to say is wrong. Because creative people, very opinionated, and if you find a creative structure that works for you, why wouldn't that be the be-all and end-all? And I particularly like what he said here about how you want to start out in writing, grab a book on writing. It's about the three-act structure. It doesn't say anywhere that the three-act structure is kind of an invented thing to help us get our heads around writing as a concept. So they think that's the only thing they can do. And that's not the truth. This is one of his books, by the way. Really interesting guy. Has a 12-sequence structure that you can follow if you want to. So what did Egri have to say about Aristotle? He denied the importance of character, and his influence persists today. I love how damning this is. So, but it really casts a different light on what Field said about all stories, from Aristotle through all the constellations of civilization. No. He was saying that to make the three-act structure sound like it had always been there. Wasn't there for Aristotle. Wasn't even there for Egri. It wasn't there, Sid. It took me so long to set that up. I'm very proud of it. So maybe this is the kind of situation we've got going on. 3 similarly dressed opinions that have inherent and crucial differences. They all take a different meaning from what Aristotle said, as though the person who quotes Aristotle accurately is going to find the one piece and become the king of writers. I love coming back to Egri's quotes. He said that before any of the others wrote anything, and he nailed it on the head. Everyone's got a different opinion on writing. But here's the thing. Aristotle was talking about Greek tragedies. Egri was talking about stage plays. Field and Truby were talking about screenplays. None of them were talking about video games. They didn't exist yet. We're working in a completely different medium. So how can 3-act structure hurt you? The title of the talk was a joke at first, but it's also not a joke. A lot of very talented people think they can't tell stories because they haven't studied writing, or they don't know structure, or on the flip side, they have studied writing and they do know structure, and they think they have to meet that sort of idea in their game world. Like, if their story doesn't have like a beginning, middle, and end the way Sid Field described it, their game story is wrong. There's also the dreaded third option where people think story and narrative take too much time to get into the game because, a game can't fit 3 whopping acts of storytelling all the time. So, hang on, someone in the audience inevitably says, Baldur's Gate 3 has 3 acts and it won all of the awards. An act is different to 3-act structure. So, there's the Wikipedia article up there. So, there are 3 acts in Baldur's Gate 3. There are 3 acts in a lot of plays. 3-act structure is its own thing. They are not one and the same. Often you will get something that is 3 acts that does not follow 3-act structure. If you do want to argue with me about whether or not Baldur's Gate 3 does follow 3-act structure, that's something different. You can find me after the talk. So why are they called the same thing? Acts already existed in Aristotle's time, and earlier the term stuck around in the popularity of 3-act structures, probably seeped into general use enough for 3 acts and 3-act structure to mean the same thing to most people, I guess. I don't know. But the attention span of a gamer. A lot of people apologize to me at work because, I'm the narrative person, because they don't read in games, they skip through dialogue, or they prefer games that don't have much story content at all. All of these things are fine, it doesn't bother me. I have ADHD, I get it. I play a lot of Balatro. There's no narrative in Balatro. Well, it depends. What does bother me is when people say, gamers don't read, as a flat rejection of narrative. If you remember nothing else, remember this: narrative design doesn't need words or dialogue or characters. So we don't need the 3-act structure where we're going. We don't need words. So, before I go any further, here are some examples, because I've been using a lot of words myself. What are games that have done amazing story or amazing storytelling, amazing character, without the 3-act structure? I apologize in advance for how crunchy some of these screenshots are going to be. Journey, 2012, completely explorative story told through environment and player discovery. Gone Home, 2013, took what felt like the setup to a horror game to encourage the player to look at every single detail as a touching story emerged. Bloodborne, 2015, the world is ruined. You can learn how it got there through item descriptions and character design and your relationship to the environment. Her Story, 2015, you're watching a bunch of Vine-length police clips about some lady and you want to figure out what she did. Far Lone Sails, 2018, child maintains a locomotive with the express purpose of going as far to the right as they can. Return of the Obra Dinn, 2018, for insurance reasons you need to account for every single one of these dead sailors. Unpacking, 2021, without telling you a single word, you learn how this person feels about their belongings just from where you're allowed to put things. Sticky Business, 2023, brighten up the lives of fictional people you'll never meet through mutual expressions of creativity. So, what does narrative in a game need? What do all of these pictures have in common? If you recognize the moments these screenshots are from, everyone should feel like a gut punch because it's about emotion. And your emotional scenes do not need military-grade firearms or weaponry, as a friend of mine put it, or to punch your player right in the daddy issues, as many of these games did to me. They are narrative-heavy games with a lot of violence and death, but I deliberately picked screenshots that I recognize that don't have any dialogue or any other significant text to get my point across. But as I was looking for screenshots for the slide, I was like, all right, I need the ones. It was like, when I saw that happen in game, I went, oh, fuck. All right, hear me out. Here's a quick sidebar to let you catch your breath if you were indeed gut punched by any of those pictures on the previous slide. The first commercial film screening was in 1895. According to Wikipedia, it took the medium 84 years to produce the 3-act structure. The first commercial video game came out in 1971, according to Wikipedia. So the good news is we don't need to nail down a consensus on narrative structure in games until 2055, according to me. We're not there yet. So, emotion and audience distance. Around this time of putting the slides together, I was like, oh no, I've gone real pretentious, so bear with me. In the preface to her translations of the works of Euripides, a book called Grief Lessons, Anne Carson gives us this banger of a paragraph that really resonated with me when I read it. There's a theory that watching unbearable stories about other people lost in grief and rage is good for you, may cleanse you of your darkness. Do you want to go down to the pits of yourself all alone? Not much. What if an actor could do it for you? Isn't that why they are called actors? They act for you. You sacrifice them to action. But Carson isn't the only person who said such things about the experience of being in the audience, of passively taking in a story being told. It's Aristotle with the steel chair. So, for the first time, we're talking about imitation, about actors, about experiences outside ourselves. And just like Carson said, we're talking about seeing ourselves and what's unfolding before us in the movie or the play or the TV show, whatever the experience is where you are passively taking in an experience. It's the I do that moments. So it's haha, I do that versus oh boy, I am doing that. It's the gameplay-driven necessity of it all. Your player is not sitting there watching the actor, or in some games they are, but your player is an active participant in all of these moments. Any joy or catharsis or pain they experience while playing your game is going to be through the results of their own actions, the actions you have made available to them. And to be clear, there's the potential of so much joy. Sticky Business is literally a game about making stickers. It's the best. 3-act structure has no power here unless you choose it. You might want to. It might be a great fit for your game. I'm not judging. I've worked on games that needed the 3-act structure. I've used it plenty of times, but it comes down to you. Only you can decide if the 3-act structure is what your game needs. They prioritize pacing above emotion. It's just about impossible to know the pace of how every player will play your game. I mean, we haven't even touched on how it's a very, very Western style of storytelling. Look up Kijo Tenketsu, I didn't pronounce it properly, and its influence on the Super Mario games, and its influence on Ghibli. So, Egri, again, said it better than I could. Without exception, everyone was born with creative ability. It is essential that people be given the opportunity to express themselves. And with the game scene being what it is, we have more opportunities than ever before to find unique ways to express ourselves. We've got VR, we've got the new face of Emma. Whatever kind of story you want to tell through a game, you can find a way to do it. You don't need to study Sid Field or John Truby or Lagos Egri or Aristotle or anyone else I've mentioned. Every human being needs an outlet for their inborn creative talent. If you feel you would like to write, then write. But if you do want to study some books on narrative design for games, take a photo of the slide. This is not exhaustive, this is just what I could fit on here. Why are you giving me your books on here? It's a good book.
Thank you.
I couldn't make these tile nicely, but I tried to keep the titles and authors clear. Copies of most of these live next to the narrative area in our office at Pickbock. And this is the last slide. Good work, Sarah. It's over. So I guess if people have questions, I can answer questions and I can sit down again. Hang on.
Who was this Egri guy you keep mentioning? I've never heard of him, so I'm just curious.
How do we... I will get you the cover of his book, if I can... there we go. Getting there. Going back in time. Come on. So he wrote a book called The Art of Dramatic Writing back in the 30s or 40s, and it's been reprinted quite a few times, so it can be found with a lot of different covers. And so he was talking about playwriting. It was a very influential book from the 30s through to the 70s when Sid Field's book on screenwriting came out. And he was very passionate about giving people the tools to unleash their own creativity, which I really respect. Going backwards some more. That's John Truby. That's him again. There we go. That's the book to look for. I found a copy of this one with this cover in Artie B's a couple of years ago, and I'm a big fan. I couldn't tell you much about him as a person, but I like what he has to say about dramatic writing. I'm so sorry that took so long to click through.
I'm going to ask a question for the ones who, for myself as well, because I'm more of on the serious game side, but could you talk through those really emotional moments that you had screenshotted and what was exactly happening for you? And yeah, just what you took away from those in those games.
All right.
And which games they were.
Okay. This is much faster than it was going backwards. Okay, these ones. So we have Red Dead Redemption, the ending of Red Dead Redemption up the top there. We have the first Telltale Walking Dead game here. Then we have Spec Ops: The Line in the middle. And on the left, we have The Last of Us. So the reason all of these particularly got me emotional, well, most of them, is I lost my father at a young age. So anytime a video game goes straight for the daddy issues, like, I'm a cheap shot. I fold like dirty laundry. And two of these specifically go straight for father-daughter-esque relationships. Walking Dead asks you if you can have this child shoot her father figure. Last of Us has you carry your wounded daughter through a city that is falling to a not quite normal zombie apocalypse, only to be shot by the military. And then Red Dead Redemption is about a father who has spent an entire game trying to get his family free from the people trying to hurt them, only to be gunned down by the people he was working for. And Spec Ops: The Line, I can't quite describe the emotional experience there, except you've just done a war crime and you didn't know that's what you were doing at the time, but then as you are walking through the disaster of what you've done, it all clicks into place.
Less a question and more that I can bow tie the Spec Ops: The Line experience. The point comes across like right at the very end of the game in that it's playing on your idea that you're just playing a shooter to feel like a hero. But there is a sort of less of father-son and more of a mentor-mentee experience dynamic between Conrad and I forget the captain's name. I think it's Walker. But there is a very similar theme that it's like there is that mentor-mentee, father-child dynamic in play. And that one of the endings you can just end up repeating the sins of the father and make Dubai an even worse hellhole.
Thank you so much. I had forgotten a lot about that game except for that sequence. This is a great slide for us to be paused on. If you want another example of a game that doesn't use 3-act structure, you can check out Packbox Into the Dead Our Darkest Days, which is down... No, it's not downstairs, it's just out here. Yes, I helped work on that game. I wrote some of the barks and the flavor text in there. And I did not use the 3-act structure to write those. I used my own experience with mental illness and physical pain. So when Mike, the senior narrative designer, said, hey, we need barks for characters who are experiencing like intense physical injury or intense emotional distress, I was like, I've got you. I know how that works, just let me stew.
This will be the last question.
All right.
Sorry to end on kind of a tricky one, but one of the benefits of the 3-act structure for someone who, for example, hasn't written yet is it gives a nice sort of like, I've nailed it sort of feeling, because it gives you the sort of like big emotional moments that you're supposed to hit, and when you write those, you know that you've hit them because when you kind of read them back, they work. How do you know when a moment in a game is working? Like as a narrative designer, how do you know that it's hitting? Can you know that before it gets all the way into like in a player's hands, for example?
You will not know if it works until it's in a player's hands. You just won't. It might work for you, and if it does work for you, and if you're the main audience that you're making your game for, then perfect. But if you are trying to make emotional experiences for other people, you are going to need other people to give you feedback as to whether or not you've made an emotional experience. And like, choosing the 3-act structure for your project is not a bad thing. It's choosing the 3-act structure. And I think that was the last question, so if anyone else has questions, I will be around. I'll be here all day. So thank you so much for listening to me waffle on for the past half hour. Hope you have a great rest of your conference.